Another big storyline from Wednesday night in college basketball, Creighton shocked UConn at Gamble Pavilion with a major, major win for the Blue Jays, who have taken a step back this season compared to past years under Greg McDermott. But Creighton got its best win of the season, and now you start thinking about championship week. And now you start thinking about the fact that Creighton was able to go on the road, put up 91 points at UConn, make 10 of 21 threes. And now you start thinking about the idea that Creighton has not only won at UConn, but it also won at Villanova, two of the teams from the Big East who are slated to play in the NCAA tournament. Creighton will also play at St. John's Saturday at Madison Square Garden. And now you start thinking about Creighton, and you think about the Big East only having 3 teams projected to play in the NCAA tournament. Creighton's beat 2 of them, UConn and Villanova, on their home floor. That, to me, says Creighton is the bid stealer to watch during the Big East tournament during championship week, because this team, which again is moving on post Ryan Kalkbrenner, post Stephen Ashworth, has been more of a team that's hovered around 500. But with that said, if you're good enough to beat UConn at Gamble Pavilion and you're good enough to beat Villanova on the road, you are good enough to beat anybody at Madison Square Garden during the Big East tournament. And Creighton is going to get a crack at that on Saturday afternoon. But what about UConn? This loss to the Blue Jays effectively drops UConn off the 1 seed line for now. The good thing for the Huskies is that UConn's next 2 games are quad 1 opportunities, and that's something that obviously has not been a common occurrence in the Big East. UConn is going to go on the road to Villanova over the weekend, and then next week in Hartford, UConn will get the rematch with St. John's. Johnny's won a couple of weeks ago at Madison Square Garden. But now we're looking at a dynamic that has shifted in the Big East. UConn, and for good reason, was always viewed as a national title and Final Four contender, and it still is. But in terms of the Big East race, because of UConn's loss last night, because of St. John's win at Marquette, the Red Storm have now won 12 games in a row. That means that St. John's is now in sole possession of first place in the Big East. That means that if St. John's can beat Creighton on Saturday at Madison Square Garden, it will go into UConn, if UConn beats Villanova, with an opportunity to take a 2-game lead over the Huskies next week in Hartford. The buildup for that game cannot be any spicier, because this, to me, the UConn St. John's dynamic was the most anticipated dynamic that we had entering the 25-26 college basketball season. I was at the Garden a couple weeks ago. I did the game on national radio. I had never seen a home turnout for St. John's like I saw. And now the stakes are going to only be bigger next week in Hartford. Tough game for UConn and Villanova. Tough game for St. John's on Saturday against Creighton and Madison Square Garden. But once those games are over, everything could be different. The teams could be equal if St. John's loses and UConn obviously wins, or St. John's could be looking to essentially maybe wrap up the Big East regular season title. It doesn't get any juicier. Now, what does this mean for UConn and its NCAA tournament path? UConn, and I'm going to release my bracket projection Friday morning at 9 a.m. on X, as I always do, my bracket breakdown for that week. UConn, I have moved to the 2 line, and I moved Houston to a 1 seed. That means, and this could be a benefit for UConn for the long term, if you're thinking about things from a geographical perspective, UConn, by being a 2 seed in the East, could then play in Philadelphia in Washington, D.C., rather than go and be in the South region and potentially have to deal with Houston at the Toyota Center in Houston in the South Regional Final. I know we're speculating a little bit, but that's what we do when you're talking about the NCAA tournament seeding process. Now, a big concern for me, for UConn, has been the defense. In the last 4 games, we have seen UConn lose something defensively. During that span, the Huskies are giving up over 79 points per game. The Huskies last night, home against Creighton, gave up 91 points. UConn's defense has to be rectified, and Alex Caravan, who has been obviously a model for college basketball over the last 4 years or so, only has a couple of weeks left in his college career. Over the last 5 or 6 games, he's been very sporadic. He's been very up and down. They need him to be more consistent. You need more out of Caravan from a consistency perspective. You also need UConn's defense to be championship level, and it hasn't been. This is going to be a 2-game stretch for the Huskies at Villanova, home against St. John's, that will define their season, because let's make no mistake about it here. If UConn could get these next 2 games, they are right back in play to have one of the best resumes in the country. And here's another thing to point out, because I know a lot of people sometimes forget about this. The NCAA tournament is seeded by your overall body of work. So every game counts the same from opening night till obviously Selection Sunday when the brackets come out. So UConn has the following wins on its resume from earlier in the season: Florida neutral, Illinois neutral, at Kansas. Also a win, obviously, against Texas at home. These are big time wins for the Huskies. Major wins. And now we're in a scenario where we're going to see where the Huskies land. I think you can make an argument for UConn that it would be better served staying away from Houston in the South region at the Toyota Center if they were a 1 seed. But if you're in the East region, the seeds hold, that means you would have to play Cam Boozer and Duke to go to a Final Four. Have to beat somebody to go to a Final Four. That's part of it.